Following on from my previous video on Donoghue and Stevenson, in this video we will look at an Australian case that has fascinated legal scholars and enthusiasts for almost a century, one of Australia's most famous consumer law cases that applied Donoghue, also known as the case of the man with the itchy underpants, Grant and Australian Knitting Mills. If you're like me and fascinated by the development of consumer law, join me now to find out more. First, I'd like to say that it's important to separate the humour from the legal facts. For example, while it is funny that people in those days didn't wash often, that is not a fact critical to this case. Another thing to note that is in the 1930s, cases could go beyond the High Court to the English courts, in this case the Privy Council. This right of appeal was slowly abolished by legislation starting in the 1960s and completely gone by the 1980s with the Australia Acts. Finally, it is useful to recall the 4 questions to answer in establishing a duty of care and whether there has been negligence that come from the Donoghue and Stevenson case. 1. Was a duty of care owed? 2. Was this duty of care breached or broken? 3. Was there suffering or damage? And 4. Was the injury or damage caused as a result of the breach of the duty of care? Turning now to the facts of the case. Dr. Grant, the plaintiff, walked into a department store that sold the types of goods he wanted to buy, spoke to a sales assistant, and then bought 2 pairs of woolen underwear and 2 singlets. Dr. Grant put on his undies and soon after his skin became irritated. Despite applying some calamine lotion and seeing a doctor, his skin irritation got worse and worse, and this developed into acute dermatitis. His illness became very severe, and at times his doctor thought he might even die. He was confined to his bed for weeks. He couldn't work for a long time. Dr. Grant initially brought an action against 2 defendants. The central discussion in the case is whether Australian Knitting Mills, the manufacturer of the underpants, is liable in this new thing called the tort of negligence. Grant claimed the manufacturer was negligent as they used a chemical substance in the manufacture of the undies that caused his dermatitis. Second, he claimed the retailer breached the implied warranties that the goods should be fit for purpose. The trial judge gave judgment for the plaintiff, Dr. Grant, against both defendants and awarded damages which amounted to about $200,000 in today's money. The case then went all the way to the High Court where the trial judge's decision was dismissed. Then, in Dr. Grant's appeal to the Privy Council, the High Court's decision was reversed and it was held that there was enough evidence to find that 1. The garments contained a chemical that was the result of negligence in manufacture, and 2. This defect was latent. It couldn't be seen or detected by looking at or touching the garment. And lastly, the defect in the undies caused the damage suffered by the plaintiff, Dr. Grant. Their lordships therefore said that the case came within the principle established in Donoghue's case and held that the manufacturer owed a duty of care to Dr. Grant as it was his use of the garments that could be contemplated and intended when the garments left the factory, and therefore the manufacturer was liable to Dr. Grant in tort. Their lordships also restored the original case against the retailer. The case can be summarised in the following quote from the judgment, and excuse the sexist language. A manufacturer of products which he sells in such a form as to show that he intends them to reach the ultimate consumer in the form in which they left him, with no reasonable possibility of intermediate examination, and with the knowledge that the absence of reasonable care in the preparation or putting up of the products that will result in an injury to the consumer's life or property owes a duty of care to the consumer to take reasonable care. So, next time you buy an item of clothing and it has a warning to wash it first, you might take a moment to thank Dr. Grant and his itchy pants for helping to keep you safe from harm.